Hey there, welcome to Brit Scale Builds. Today we are taking a look at the Meng World War Toons 006 T34. So normally I make 1/48 scale models, but I picked these up while I was in mainland China. They're fun little kits, relatively cheap, definitely designed more for the for kids. In regards to assembly, pretty straightforward. You really don't need glue on these things, they actually just snap and hold into place. But a few sections I use some glue on it just to hold them in place.
Ralph, are you eating your paste?
Over.
So here, I'm not necessarily a tank expert, and that is shown here. First rookie mistake. I accidentally attached the exhaust pipes upside down. Unfortunately I didn't realise till much later in the build. But anyway, that's assembly done. Most of it was done off screen, but let's move over to painting. So just to prime it, I used a Tamiya flat black with just a Tamiya paint thinner. I used about a 50-50 mix of both. So I wanted a dark base, because I wanted to use a fairly dark colour scheme on this particular tank. So for the base coat, using Tamiya XF61 dark green. Here you can see with the first coat on. So after I'd applied the base coat, I then started to put some shadows in.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it.
And any areas that you want to kind of just emphasize where shadows would be. So seams, edges, underneath, as you can see. So just provide a bit of contrast. After the shadows are done, then move on to highlights.
That's insane.
With the highlights, it's just a case of using the same base colour, then adding a bit of buff just to make it slightly lighter. Here you can see, and this is again just spraying those areas that would naturally catch sunlight. So at the tops, edges, so you can hear spraying the top of these, the turret here. There you can see with the shadows and highlights completed. Next, moving on to decals. I'm sure there's a ton of different tools and things you can use, but I just used some warm water, some tweezers and a cotton bud to put these on. So there's only a few decals for this model, as you can see. And you can see my shoddy repair job of putting the exhaust pipes the right way around. Next up, applying an oil filter. So this using the dot filter approach. As you can see, I've got a few different colours here, a green, a brown and a black. Basically just applying them all over. And then what we do is take an oil paint thinner, so this is turpentine. Just applies that filter all over. You can see here one thing, I thought I'd cleaned it, but there's a nice big thumbprint right there.
I am tired of these jokes about my giant hand. The first such incident occurred in 1956.
But yeah. Now on to doing some pin wash, so just around any edges any recesses. Just put a bit of emphasis in those. So here on the engine cover. After that I started applying some chipping effects. Unfortunately this entire shot was not in focus. I managed to capture a few frames where there is, but the idea is that you put the paint on a sponge, dab most of it off on a piece of tissue, and then you basically just apply it around the corners, so it gives a slight chipping effect. So you can see it here being applied. And then over these chipping effects you can then apply rust. So it worked okay, but certainly there's some room for improvement. I used this texture pigment of yellow rust. Didn't really like the results. And certainly along the side plates there and on the front you can see probably should have taken a bit more care and put a bit more chips there, but lesson learned for next time. As I was planning on making a diorama, I wasn't too fussed about the track, so I just done some dry brushing. As you can see here with some flat earth, and I also used some desert yellow. Yeah, just using a tissue, getting rid of most of the paint. So, moving on to diorama. While there's German vehicles featured in this, I wanted to create a Kursk setting in these big kind of open fields. So doing a fairly small diorama, but I wanted to replicate that. So using a piece of styrofoam, here using a hot wire cutter, so it's something I just managed to pick up from a arts and crafts store. Definitely makes it easier when cutting styrofoam.
I'm melting! Melting! Oh, what a world!
It wasn't quite smooth after that, so did have to trim it down with a hobby knife. And then also used a sanding sponge as well, just to smooth it out. So I wanted to replicate a hill. So I use air dry clay and some PVA glue. You can see this air dry clay, just mix it with some water. And just work it in.
5, 6, 7, 8.
So I wanted to build up a bit of a elevation on one side, so just working it in. Takes some time, but again, you've got a fairly long working time of this, so just add more water.
Wow, look at this.
Yeah, the only downside is it's fairly messy. Probably should have wore gloves, but there you go.
Oh, that's nasty.
Okay, so there it is after it's dried. Okay, next up I wanted to apply a layer of dirt effect over the top. So this is actually using mud from outside, so using a bit of PVA glue, some mud and a bit of water, just mixing it together. So the mud is just something that is dug up from the ground outside. I did add a bit of paint, so this is flat earth. This is quite an orange mud, so I wanted to tone it down. I think I also added a bit of desert yellow in here as well, make it a more dusty effect. And then it's just a case of scooping it on and scraping it to conform to the clay.
Brown for first course, white for pudding. Brown is savoury, white's the treat. Rob sounds like he's laughing because I actually love brown toast.
After I was happy with the effect, I then went over with a brush just to kind of give it a more mud looking effect, so just stippling it with an old brush on the sides as well. This probably wasn't necessary, but I wanted to at least mark where the tracks would be, and just providing some recesses where the tracks would be. Okay, after a while it is dried. There is a few cracks, so it's definitely something I need to look into seeing if there's another way. I'm not sure if it's the mud or the PVA glue that's causing it to crack, but something to check. Okay, after the mud was dry, then moving on to everyone's favourite piece, which is applying static grass. So I was able to pick up this static grass applicator online, fairly cheap. Do have to be careful with this thing because I did give myself an electric shock after touching that red wire by mistake. So after I'd done the whole base, I then sprayed it with some PVA glue and water mix. Probably should have waited a bit longer for it to dry, but what I wanted to do was make those flattened down areas. Fortunately, it didn't give the best effect, and the glue clumped together, as you'll see. So definitely lesson learned to kind of give it more time to dry before attempting to make these effects. But ultimately it'll be covered by the tracks, so it wasn't too bad. After everything had time to dry, then painting it, so just using desert yellow. Again, everything in the paintbrush is with the thinner, about 50-50 mix. So again, wanted that dry grass, straw type effect. Okay, so now that was dry, it was time to place the model, so just using some super glue. Stuck the tank in place. So yeah, as mentioned, I was trying to find a way to hide those clumps of PVA glue, and thought a smoke or dust effect might be quite nice. This did take way longer than I expected, and
it's been 84 years.
But I wanted to create some interest on the diorama as it's fairly plain. So putting some smoke and dust coming out the back, as well as you'll see I made some for the exhausts, and then along the sides. So I spent ages working that into a shape that looked semi-decent, only to find out it was fairly pointless when it came round to painting, as the airbrush just blew it all completely out of shape anyway. So
I've made a huge mistake.
So trying to use a finger to hold it in place, which again didn't really work. But you get the idea. Trying to make it look like it's dust being kicked up by the tracks as it's travelling in motion. So I've done that, as well as painting the fumes coming out of the exhaust, which you can just see there on the back. I sanded down the sides, just again using a sanding sponge, and then using a Tamiya flat black, painting the sides. that's pretty much it. So here's the end result. Not too bad. Again, definitely some things that I'd like to have improved upon, but again, this was just a fun build, just to try out some new techniques and hobbies. As you can see, definitely still not convinced on the dust effects. The chipping could have been a bit better. I wasn't too much of a fan of the rust, but other than that, I think it turned out pretty well. So, in my next build, I'm going to be working on another Tamiya 1/48 scale Sherman. So, tune in then, check it out. Thanks for stopping by.